Second, the FIB, supported by all MONUSCO forces, will fight equally bravely and successfully against the FDLR. The third issue, Madam President, I would like to bring to you today relates to the mission's work on human rights in the DRC. Justice, accountability, and the respect for human rights are the cornerstone on which stability and peace are built. For many years now, the Joint Human Rights Office has helped to document grave human rights violations against the Congolese people and to advocate for and protect their rights. This work is undertaken not to weaken or to blame the government of the DRC. This work is undertaken to strengthen good governance, one of the national commitments of the Peace, Security and Cooperation Framework. The respect for human rights and good governance leads to more stability, not instability. We want to empower the government in its fight against impunity, to support its efforts, which have been notable for improved governance and long-term stability. MONUSCO and its Joint Human Rights Office are and must continue to be partners for the government in those efforts. We have had very good day-to-day cooperation, most of it discreet, and notable progress, especially with regard to the security services. The human rights due diligence policy is a good example of how our human rights work impacts on the respect of human rights by the security forces. However, public human rights reports are and will remain an instrument of the human rights work of the mission. In the last 2 weeks, we issued 2 such reports, jointly with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. One on the human rights violations of the M23 during their reign over parts of eastern DRC, and the other on October 15th on the government's Operation Likofi against street gangs in Kinshasa. The report documents extrajudicial killings of 9 persons and the enforced disappearance of 32 others. In accordance with the strict methodology of the Joint Human Rights Office, these figures are conservative. The Likofi report led to the government's decision to expel the head of the Joint Human Rights Office, Mr. Scott Campbell, within 48 hours. I asked the government to reconsider this decision. I express my absolute confidence in the professionalism of Scott Campbell and that of his team. And I stand firmly by the report they produced, for which I take full responsibility. I'm equally concerned by recent threats against other staff in the Joint Human Rights Office. It is unacceptable for these dedicated individuals to be intimidated or menaced for doing the work which is at the core of your mandate to us, in line with the Secretary General's right upfront policy as well as the UN Charter. This work must continue unimpeded. And I'm extremely grateful for the support of the Secretary General as well as those among you who have expressed solidarity in urging the government to revise their decision and to take action to address threats against MONUSCO staff. I would like to draw 4 conclusions. First, the respect for human rights leads to stability. Second, it is those who commit human rights violations and go unpunished who tarnish the image of the DRC and weaken its security institutions, not those who make them public. Third, our work is collaborative and constructive, aiming to strengthen the government's moral authority. And fourth, I intend to offer to the Congolese government a regular high-level human rights dialogue. In this dialogue, which may be discreet, all pending human rights questions can be discussed and confidence can be built. It will be of particular importance during the forthcoming electoral period. Madam President, allow me to touch briefly on a number of other important issues. Just as our human rights work is critical to our protection of civilians' mandate, so too is the approach of our military component. The Force Commander and I agree that the protection of civilians is more than a mandated task. It is our raison d'être in the DRC. It is a moral imperative of the UN, and we also agree that to be effective, we need a new paradigm. Presence alone is not enough. Presence without action in the face of violence undermines our credibility. Patrolling in hermetic armored personnel carriers is not enough. Troops must get out of their vehicles and interact directly with communities. Staying in safe areas is not enough. The force must pursue the danger where it lies. If necessary, they need to march for days in the jungle, as the force commander himself has done, to take protection of civilians to the source. Action, not inaction. Proactive, not reactive. Mobile forces, not static battalions. Feet, not wheels. I reiterate my August message to all contingents. When civilians are at risk, act, don't ask. Protection of civilians up front. And I ask for the support of the Council and especially those UN member states who contribute troops to endorse and promote this guidance. The last point I wish to raise is the absolute urgency to see the DRC, the country geographically in the heart of Africa, a nation with immense wealth and potential, to become also the economic heart of Africa. It has made substantial progress over the past 10 years, particularly in terms of macroeconomic stability, with a stable currency and inflation under control at 1%. But its people remain among the poorest in the world, with 70% under the poverty line, and unemployment among its youth estimated by the African Development at over 70%, and this has to change. It is time for Congo's money abroad to come home, and for that money and more to be invested in the DRC. It is time to move from a war economy to peace economy. It is time to see illegal exploitation turned into legitimate trade. It is time to move from excessive wealth for a few to sufficiency for all. And I fully support Said Djinnit's focus on stimulating private investment, and I encourage the government to put the necessary legal protection in place and to enforce them. As always, I wish to conclude by acknowledging the national and international staff of the United Nations for their dedication and tireless efforts to improve the lives of the people in the DRC. Today, I especially wish to thank those colleagues deployed in a very remote corner of Equateur province, where an outbreak of the Ebola virus once again erupted. This is the 7th time since its discovery in '76 in the DRC. I have visited the Ebola-infected area in Lokolia recently. I have witnessed the selflessness, the courage, and the outstanding efforts by Mr. Taparabindra and his team. At great personal risk and sacrifice, they have set up the Lokolia camp from which the sick can be treated in a safe, controlled environment. They exemplify the values of the UN, and I commend them, every single one of them. I also congratulate the DRC on its swift and effective action which has limited the spread of this horrific disease. I'm pleased to report that there has been no new infection since the 4th of October, a hopeful sign that the worst might be over in the DRC. Finally, please allow me to express my most heartfelt congratulations to Keti Atsuba, a colleague from Radio Okapi in Bukavu, who has just received last Friday the prestigious Prince of Asturias Award from the King of Spain for her outstanding reporting on sexual violence suffered by women in the DRC. It is truly gratifying to work with such committed and courageous colleagues like Kedi, and to see that her efforts in bringing the issue of sexual violence have met with international recognition at the highest order. Señora Presidenta, distinguidos miembros del Consejo de Seguridad, permítanme de nuevo agradecerles por su apoyo constante, consideración, atención e interés por las cuestiones críticas para la República Democrática del Congo. Es siempre un placer y un honor estar aquí con ustedes. Muchas gracias por esta oportunidad.
Doy especiales gracias al señor Kobler por la información que ha proporcionado y por su multilingüismo. Doy la palabra ahora al distinguido señor Said Djinnit. Buenos días.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Madame la Présidente, distingués membres du Conseil, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, je suis heureux de m'adresser au Conseil pour la première fois en ma qualité d'envoyé spécial du secrétaire général pour la région des Grands Lacs. Je saisis cette occasion pour remercier le Conseil de son soutien à mon mandat ainsi que pour l'opportunité qui m'est offerte de présenter le rapport du secrétaire général sur la mise en œuvre de l'accord cadre pour la paix, la sécurité et la coopération pour la RDC et la région. Je suis ravi de le faire en compagnie de mon collègue et ami Martin Kobler, le représentant spécial du secrétaire général en République démocratique du Congo et chef de la MONUSCO. Je tiens à témoigner ici du soutien total qu'il m'apporte ainsi que ses collaborateurs depuis ma nomination. Je n'ai aucun doute que notre collaboration, forte et étroite, se poursuivra et contribuera à renforcer nos efforts complémentaires visant à assurer la mise en œuvre effective de l'accord cadre. Madame la Présidente, distingués membres du Conseil, dès ma prise de fonction, j'ai entrepris de visiter les pays de la région pour écouter et échanger avec les hautes autorités des pays signataires, les garants de l'accord cadre, ainsi qu'avec les partenaires internationaux. Les dirigeants des pays signataires se disent déterminés à mettre fin au cycle de la violence et à conduire la région sur la voie du développement et de la stabilité durable. Ils voient en l'accord cadre un instrument utile qui permettra d'accélérer et de soutenir cette transformation. Mais pour que la région sorte définitivement du cercle vicieux de la violence et de l'instabilité et aille résolument vers son destin solidaire et prospère, elle devra se débarrasser définitivement des problèmes qui la retiennent dans son passé douloureux en perpétuant la suspicion et la méfiance entre les pays et les peuples. Il est dès lors évident qu'il faudra s'attaquer en priorité aux questions sensibles de sécurité, héritées de l'histoire tourmentée de la région, et s'atteler à restaurer patiemment la confiance entre les pays. Dans le même temps, il conviendra de soutenir les efforts et les initiatives en cours visant à mobiliser les énergies et les ressources en vue de la transformation socio-économique rapide de la région et de son intégration. Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, I delivered these remarks a month after the Regional Oversight Mechanism endorsed the first progress report of the implementation on the PSC framework. The findings and recommendations are clear. Overall, there is a need to accelerate progress, particularly with respect to the complete neutralization of negative forces operating in the eastern DRC, including the FDLR and the ADF, as well as the implementation of the Nairobi declarations on the M23 process. I am pleased to note that the signatories and guarantors have taken steps towards addressing these issues. As regards FDLR, I wish to recall the conclusions and recommendations of the recent joint ICGLR SADC meeting, ministerial meeting, on the midterm review of the voluntary disarmament of the FDLR by the agreed deadline of 2nd January 2015. I call upon all the signatories, the guarantors, as well as the international partners to ensure that these are effectively and timely executed. We should, on the one hand, continue to facilitate the conditions for a full voluntary disarmament of the FDLR, while, on the other hand, set in motion a credible process for military pressure to be exerted at the end of the agreed deadline against those not willing to surrender. We must act now. Failure to bring the process of neutralization of FDLR to a successful conclusion, in line with the resolution of the Security Council and the decisions of the leaders of the region, will potentially exacerbate tensions, undermine our collective credibility, and put the PSC framework under serious stress. Madam President, another concern relates to the slow pace in the implementation of the Nairobi declarations. I welcome the recent impetus given to the process at the initiative of the government of the DRC. I also extend our appreciation to the government of Uganda and Rwanda for their cooperation. A few weeks ago, my office participated in a joint mission with the DRC National Oversight Mechanism and ICJLR Secretariat in Kampala to explore ways of revitalizing the process. I am pleased to inform you that further to consultations, a high-level follow-up meeting to which I have been invited will be convened in Kinshasa on 7 and 8 November. On that occasion, I will strongly encourage the concerned parties to seek solutions to existing bottlenecks and take urgent political and operational actions required to fast-track the amnesty and the repatriation process. Madam President, the twin process of dealing with FDLR and M23 should continue to receive our full attention, but so should the resurgent threat posed by the ADF, whose horrendous acts perpetrated recently against the population of Beni come as a sad reminder that the security situation remains fragile and that the hard-won gains against negative forces can be reversed. I am just back from my first visit to Eastern DRC, where I have held very useful consultations in Goma with a variety of stakeholders. Last Thursday, I visited Beni together with SRG Martin Kobler and Ambassador Boubacar Diarra, the Special Representative of the African Union to the Great Lakes region, to show our solidarity with the government and people of the DRC, as well as our sympathy for the innocent victims of the ADF. We took this opportunity to commend the FRDC for their successful military campaign against ADF with the effective support of MONUSCO and its Forced Intervention Brigade. We also encouraged FRDC and MONUSCO to further enhance their cooperation and initiate decisive joint actions towards fully neutralizing ADF with the full support of the population. Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, while I'm expected to devote serious attention to supporting efforts at neutralizing negative forces and promoting conducive environment for the expeditious implementation of the PSC framework, I am fully committed to strengthening the foundation led by my predecessor, Mary Robinson, in support of women, the youth, displaced populations, and civil society, as well as encourage economic cooperation, promotion of justice, human rights, and the fight against impunity. In this regard, I am pleased to report that following the launch of the Women Platform, small grants have already been availed to the Global Fund for Women to support initial activities designed to enhance women's ability to advocate for and monitor the implementation of the commitments of the PSC framework. These grants also provide seed money for improving women's access to clean energy. With respect to UNSCR 1325, I plan to step up my advocacy efforts for a wider adoption of a regional action plan building on the experiences of Burundi, DRC, Rwanda, and Uganda, whom I commend for commencing the implementation of the national plans. Regarding the youth, my office provided support to the organization of the ICJLR Youth Summit and going forward plans to work with other partners to support small-scale youth projects and building young entrepreneurs. Initiatives aimed at promoting the emergence of a strong regional coalition of civil society are ongoing. My office will closely work with ICJLR and other stakeholders to convene, before the end of this year, regional workshop in Bujumbura, bringing together civil society organizations from DRC, Burundi, Rwanda, and Uganda. Such gathering will lay the foundation for a wider civil society constituency whose task will be to increase awareness of the PSC framework in cooperation with governments, as well as promote solidarity, a culture of peace and tolerance between the communities in the region. We are also working closely with all stakeholders to address obstacles that impede safe and dignified returns of displaced populations, as well as provide options for those who may decide to settle in other parts in the region. In this regard, I would like to commend the government and people of Tanzania for granting rights of citizenship for about 200,000 Burundian nationals who took refuge in Tanzania decades ago, including their dependents. I also encourage all countries which are host to displaced populations, as well as countries of origin, to step up efforts to provide durable solutions. I intend, together with my fellow envoys, to support all concerned parties to promote the propitious political and security conditions for lasting solutions. Madam President, leveraging the strength of various development partners such as UNDP, World Bank, European Union, and others, my office has launched or supported various initiatives aimed at rebuilding livelihoods, create jobs, and bring about peace dividends. In this respect, the office is supporting the preparation of a Development Partners Conference to mobilize resources for development initiatives identified by signatories of the PSC framework. In the same vein, we are working closely with UNCTs in signatory countries, as well as relevant regional UN offices, to develop and align strategies and programs in support of the PSC framework. We are also strongly promoting, jointly with ICJLR, the convening in Rwanda in early December of regional ministerial consultation on private sector investment to consider and validate a substantial portfolio of projects that have been compiled. During my tour in the region, I have encouraged the PSCF countries to be adequately represented at this meeting that would pave the way to the convening of a greater private sector investment forum next year to signal a new era in the Great Lakes region towards shared stability and prosperity. Madam President, the signatories of the PSC framework are members of various regional economic communities. We must support these various organizations to unlock the vast potential of the region. I wish in this regard to encourage the ongoing efforts aimed at convening the summit of the economic community of the Great Lakes countries, CPGL, as part of the revitalization of this organization called for by the PSC framework. In this context, I held a fruitful meeting last week with the Executive Secretary of CPGL and his team, and we discussed possible areas of cooperation, including promoting trans-border security and development programs with the involvement of women. Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, as I stated in the beginning, I see my role as that of a catalyst and facilitator. I am committed to work closely with the signatory countries, the co-guarantors, my fellow special envoys, as well as the international partners committed to the PSC framework. I am confident that together we can help the region put an end to the recurring cycle of conflicts and instability, build mutual confidence and trust, and set in motion an irreversible process towards realizing its full potential in peace and stability. I thank you for your attention.
Doy las gracias al señor Dinit por la información que ha proporcionado y doy la palabra ahora al representante de Ruanda.
Thank you, Madam President. I would wish to welcome Syed Djinnit, a special envoy of the Secretary General to the Great Lakes region, for his briefing in this council. Thank also Martin Kobler, special representative of the Secretary General to the Democratic Republic of Congo and head of the United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission in DRC, MONUSCO, for his statement. I recognized also my colleague, the peer of DRC. Madam President, in April this year, Rwanda and the whole world commemorated the 20th anniversary of the genocide against the Tutsi, which claimed lives of more than 1 million of our compatriots in just 100 days. On this occasion, I recall that our country had introduced a draft that became Resolution 2150, which was co-sponsored and adopted by all 15 council members. This resolution reminded that leaders and members of the democratic forces, or the so-called democratic forces for the liberation of Rwanda, FDLR, were among the perpetrators of this genocide, and further recalled that the FDLR is a group, I quote, under United Nations sanctions operating the DRC, and which has continued to promote and commit ethnically based and other killings in Rwanda and in the DRC, and of course. This is the FDLR we are talking about today, Madam President, and this is the FDLR we have been talking about for the past 2 decades, 20 years. We are here not talking about a simple negative force such as the dozen armed groups operating in Eastern DRC. As recalled by all recent products of this council, the FDLR is not only the oldest negative force in that area, which has actually triggered the creation of a number of other armed groups, but it is also a genocidal movement that committed the unspeakable 20 years back. Today, the FDLR remains the main military and security threat to Rwanda and in the Great Lakes region due to its genocide ideology, to the mass atrocities it regularly commits against civilians in Eastern DRC, and to its substantive military structure with international networks, and to the active support it unfortunately enjoys from state and non-state actors. These actors have demonstrated on multiple occasions their hidden agenda to sanitize and preserve the FDLR in order to eventually destabilize Rwanda. Madam President, to deal with the security situation in Eastern DRC, which includes the FDLR issue, the Security Council adopted on 30th November 1999, almost 15 years ago, a UN observation mission in DRC, that MONUC, which mandate was expanded by Resolution 1291 of 2000 to include the protection of civilians, I quote, under imminent threat of physical violence, end of quote. In 2010, this mission was renamed by Resolution 1925 as UN Organization Stabilization Mission in DRC, MONUSCO. From MONUC, went to MONUSCO, with a mandate that include, I quote here, the support to strategize towards a sustainable solution of the FDLR issue, including repatriation, reinsertion, or resettlement in other areas, or judicial prosecution as appropriate, and of course. However, despite a clear mandate given by this council, MONUC, then MONUSCO, was able or unable, or should I say maybe unwilling, to implement it fully. It's in this context that the Security Council adopted Resolution 2098 in March 2013, establishing the Force Intervention Brigade, FIB, operating under MONUSCO. This force was given a robust, not only a robust and offensive mandate, which includes the mission to prevent, I quote here, the expansion of all armed groups, neutralize these groups, and to disarm them. But also, they got huge support in terms of equipment, technologies, name it. And this was basically a third mandate for a third force in 14 years. Regrettably, upon deployment, the FIB chose to restrict its action on a newly created movement named M23, and once again failed to address the question of the FDLR. In November 2013, the M23 was totally defeated, and we hoped, Rwanda hoped, at that time that MONUSCO and its FIB would eventually decide to implement Resolution 2098, which we co-sponsored here, and also then later on neutralize the FDLR. Unfortunately, despite a tough rhetoric by my good friend here, the head of MONUSCO against the FDLR, no concrete action against that genocidal movement was carried out or even planned by the UN force. In the meantime, a peace, security, and cooperation framework for the DRC and the region under the good auspices of the Secretary General, who I commend very much having initiated this. It was signed in Addis Ababa in February 2014. By this framework of peace, leaders of the region once again called for the neutralization of all armed groups, including, of course, the FDLR. Furthermore, since the beginning of this year, various summits of the ICGLR, be it alone or jointly with the SADC, emphasized on the need for disarmament, for the disarmament and demobilization of the FDLR, as well as the necessity of military actions against those unwilling to disarm in accordance with Resolution 2098 of 2013. Madam President, to justify FIB in action against the FDLR, MONUSCO's senior leadership attempted to explain that military action against the FDLR was complicated because combatants were living among civilians. This, Madam President, dear colleague, is not true. As a matter of fact, we provided to MONUSCO, we, Rwanda, provided to MONUSCO extensive evidence on the location of FDLR military camps separated from civilians. In any case, MONUSCO's duty include the protection, I think, of civilians by ensuring that women, men, and children are not used as human shield or deprived from security, healthcare, education, and development. A military action to separate civilians from combatants is, therefore, imperative. Madam President, given this impasse, the FDLR, of course, could not miss this golden opportunity in order to achieve its objective. This genocidal movement continued to form alliances with subversive opposition groups against Rwanda, to engage in activities aimed at gaining sympathy and support from the region. In May, Madam President, this year, the FDLR decided to adjust its strategy by committing to voluntarily disarm. However, from a force of 3,500 combatants, the disarmament exercise that allegedly took place in North and South Kivu on 30th May and 6th June, respectively, comprised of only 188 low-ranking combatants and their dependents. Since then, the disarmed combatants have refused to relocate from Walungu and Kanyabayonga to a designated camp in Kisangani, where no disarmament has taken place since 2nd July 2014. And on the contrary, according to our information, the FDLR continued to reinforce its troops, and around 200 additional elements were recruited since May 2014 to replace those 188. You may recall that FDLR's delaying tactics, seen by some as commitments, made the ICGLR and SADC, at the request of the DRC government and other countries of the region, to decide in July 2014 to give the FDLR a 6-month period to disarm, expiring on 2nd January 2015. But as all stakeholders have now noticed, the FDLR had never any intention to disarm. On the contrary, the FDLR, through its allies in the region, attempted, even recently, in the ICGLR SADC summit in Rwanda, Angola. Here I want really to commend Angola for its leadership. So the FDLR attempt to ensure that military action against, even recently in the ICGLR and SADC, there was an attempt to ensure that military action against the FDLR is removed from the region's agenda, thus contradicting the Security Council resolutions mentioned above and the recent press statement by this council. Madam President, given the background I have just provided, I have several questions just running into my mind, and I would wish to ask all of us, why 20 years after our collective resolve of the abused word never again, is the Security Council still struggling to find a lasting solution to a genocidal negative force whose leaders and members are among the perpetrators of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi? Why, instead of addressing the main root cause of insecurity in Eastern DRC, has the very Security Council, which comprises at least of at least 5 countries that have the required background on this situation, I named here the P5, preferred to manage this insecurity and focus on the consequences of the FDLR presence in Eastern DRC. Why? Why can't the Security Council follow up on the implementation of multiple resolutions it has itself adapted and held accountable UN force it has established, and to which it has provided a clear mandate and a consequential budget? This is over $2 billion a year we are spending. I remember the Right Honorable Prime Minister of DRC, Matata Ponyo, telling us, or challenging us, telling us, hey, if I could get 1/10 of the MONUSCO budget, if I could get 1/10 of MONUSCO budget, I could really manage a strong police forces and recover as soon as possible the security to the entire territory of Congo. Yes, $2 billion per year, and we are sitting here, 20 years. I mean, this is insane. This is ashamed. What do you want to tell to your taxpayers today? Keep spending, feeding an organization which is not doing anything. 20 years, and we are talking about a genocide of forces, and we are all committed to that great word, never again. I believe that these questions, Madam President, are legitimate, not only from a Rwandan or regional perspective, but also from a broad perspective of the maintenance of international peace and security and of our responsibility to protect. In this regard, it will be unfortunate if really the Council will spend the next 20 years in dealing with the FDLR and its consequences for the DRC and the region. Indeed, beyond the absolute need to restore peace and security in our region, I think that this collective inaction also further undermines the credibility of these great organs, which is the Security Council. Despite, Madam President, this dark picture, let me conclude on an optimistic note, as the deadline given to the FDLR is fast approaching. I'm nonetheless convinced that the overall momentum for peace, security, and cooperation in the Great Lakes region is so strong that it will eventually enable MONUSCO FIB under the supervision of this council to live up to our collective expectation of a secure and stable Great Lakes region, free of armed groups, including the last genocidal movement on our continent, or let's say in the world. I thank you, Madam President.
Doy las gracias al representante de Ruanda por su declaración.